And welcome back to General and Housing. It's about 10 of 11, and we're shifting gears over to H332, which is an act relating to a building energy code study committee. And we have had a introduction and a walkthrough of the bill. We wanted to call in some folks to make comments on it. This bill is kind of stuck in between a couple of different committees in between the House and Senate in terms of where we think it might end up by May. So we're looking long term to May, and we understand that there's a financial ask for it that has a nuance to it. So we wanted to get some clarification on that. But mostly we wanted to hear thoughts from the community, from the building community, and advocates for the bill in terms of having us understand better what we're talking about here. We don't often talk about, we're the housing committee. We don't often take forays into the building energy standards or the commercial or residential building standards. Traditionally, it seems that things like weatherization have been split between our committee and energy, what's now energy and environment. And so I wanted to welcome you all. We're going to introduce ourselves because you folks haven't been in our committee yet. We'll start with Representative Elder.
Thanks. Representative Caleb Elder from Starksboro, also representing the towns of Bristol, Lincoln, and Moncton.
Representative Tom Stevens from Waterbury.
Representative Kathleen James, Arlington, Sandgate, Sunderland, and Manchester.
Joe Parsons, I represent Topsom, Groton, and Newbury.
Emily Krasnow, South Burlington.
Dennis Labowne, Linden, Newark, Sutton, Sheffield, Wheelock.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Burrows, and I represent Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
Good morning. I'm Larry Labor. I represent Orleans, Essex, District 1.
I'm Mary Howard, and I represent Rutland District 6.
And I guess I should fill in the rest of my district as well. I also represent Bolton, Huntington, and Buellscore. So welcome. We have the first witness that we have on the list today is Jason Webster from Huntington Homes. And Jason, I just will kind of tee you up by saying one of the reason for this bill, as it strikes me, is that and the way it's written in the bill, in the findings, is that while the Public Service Department adopts and updates the codes, they don't have the capacity to administer or enforce them. And I believe this study committee is aiming to remedy that. So I would just pass the microphone to you and welcome.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me today. My name's Jason Webster. I'm glad I'm here today. This is an important issue for all builders. And again, I appreciate that I can talk to you today. It's a perfect day to be in the backcountry off Ricker Mountain, but you're more important than that today.
For at least a little while.
For a little while. There's still time. So yes, the bill in front of you is about the enforcement aspect on the energy code. I think there are some other people here today that are going to talk more specifically about the code or about this bill and the energy code. What I was hoping to do is kind of maybe zoom out a little bit to provide a little bit of context on the way that building codes work in the areas that have building codes. We as a building company are located here in, I'm standing inside our 100,000 square foot shop in East Montpelier, but we build and deliver, I should say, we are a modular manufacturing company. So we build modules here and then we deliver them to builders and clients all over New England. Half of what we build is in Vermont. The other half of what we build is in the rest of New England, with the majority of that half being on the Cape and the islands of Massachusetts. Massachusetts has a full-blown code program. New York State has a full-blown code program. New Hampshire, Maine, Connecticut, they all have full programs. And what I was hoping to do is kind of just give an overview of how full code programs work so that we can see how Vermont's current system kind of benchmarks against that. I'm not saying we need to go to a full code program, but these people have already figured it out, and they have created a system that gets nearly 100% compliance every project, every time. And so the way, kind of big picture, the way these code programs work is that the state legislatures created an agency that was tasked with overseeing codes, building codes. And when building codes for me, big picture, it's not just building codes. It's building, it's energy, it's plumbing, and it's an electrical. That agency adopts codes, they amend codes, they license builders. There are license requirements and continuing education requirements for builders to operate in every state but ours. They then create a process of application, inspection, certification, and if necessary, enforcement for codes. They mostly do this. They administer this usually through agents in municipalities, so the local building inspectors. But if a town doesn't have a local building inspector, then the state will step in, and a builder would apply to the state for the same thing. So kind of the takeaway on it is that the states have created agencies and full-blown programs to administer all the steps necessary to effectively create, oversee, and certify building codes, building energy, plumbing, and electrical. Vermont Vermont's a little bit more hodgepodge of the way that building codes work here. So we don't, kind of like just taking one of them to start, like the plumbing code. There's kind of a what if statement that you have to go through to figure out if the plumbing code is even applicable to your project. And so it depends on, is it a single family project? Is it a multi-family project? Does it have its own drilled well, or is it connected to, municipal water? Depending on how you flow through that path, the state, the plumbing code might be applicable to your project, or it might not. Even further, if you establish that the plumbing code is applicable to your project, the DPS then, or their inspectors, then they have category cases of whether it's a low risk, I don't know what they use, low risk or high risk project. If it's or low priority, high priority project. If it's a low priority project, it kind of acknowledges that the code is applicable, but the inspectors are not going to come inspect. And if it's a high priority project, then the code is applicable and you will be getting inspections. Electrical works kind of the same way. Really, there is on the building side, it really is more of a life safety inspection than it is a building code inspection. Usually gets triggered at multifamily. It's not triggered for single family construction. And if you do trigger it on multifamily, then you're going to get, you are going to get inspected. But again, even though people think of it as a building code inspection, those inspectors, they're out of the Division of Fire Safety. They really are looking at life safety issues with egress and smoke detectors and, does the building require a sprinkler? They're not diving into building code items, such as, framing inspections, looking at, jack and king stud continuous, nailing patterns on shear walls and that kind of stuff. And so Vermont really doesn't have anybody that's looking over the shoulders of builders on the building code side. With our current energy code, it's even less oversight, right? That the energy code is technically applicable to 100% of the projects in the state, but there are no agents inspecting it. There's nobody. It's a fully self-certified program. I think the last DPS study that was done showed that, I think it was 2016, which the 2016 energy code was just good building practice. It was what most builders were already building. And they found a compliance rate of, I think it was around 65% of codes, of projects that were built were actually not certified. Most of them were certified because builders were just signing the forms, but 65% were built to actually meet the standards at the time. I would argue that as we've gone through time and as the code has gotten more stringent, we're under the 2020 code right now. I drive around, I see a lot of building. I don't think 30% of what's being built right now meets the current energy code. The energy code in the next amendment is going to a more of a high performance standard or an advanced wall standard. It's not typical construction anymore. Without enforcement, without somebody looking, it's going to drop to 5 or 10% compliance. It's not because the builders are necessarily trying to cheat the system. It's because there is no program or process for the builders to even know what the system is. And so we, as kind of a building community, AIAVT, home builders, we've all been asking for enforcement for a long time. I think like we all feel like we're at the edge of the cliff now, though, where it's really, really critical that an enforcement piece is enacted as this energy code gets more stringent. Backing up a little bit to the states that have real code programs. No program, building, energy, plumbing, or electrical, operates in isolation. That there are requirements that might originate in one code, but the safety aspect of it is being inspected maybe from another code. Example is that the energy code might require a certain R value, but it's the building code that's looking at the wall assembly and the organization of the layers to determine whether or not that wall is built with good building science in mind. As we get to more complicated wall assemblies, it just becomes more and more important and critical that the wall assemblies are built in the right layers. Kind of a basic simple analogy, and this is kind of, I'll give you you want to be successful in building, this is all you have to understand to build a durable home, is that walls can get wet. They do get wet as long as they have the ability to dry out. So as long as drying is higher than wetting, it's fine. I like to use the analogy of your bath towel, right? If you use your bath towel, you hang it up and you give it enough time to dry, you can use it the next day. You can do that you can do it for a bunch of days. If you use that towel and you don't give it the chance to dry and you just keep using it, it's going to get pretty gross pretty fast. That's what happens inside our wall assemblies. Historically, with lesser levels of insulation, that wasn't really a problem because the house consumed so much energy, and so much energy was forcing its way through the walls that energy was drying that wall assembly out as it left. That's why all these old houses with no insulation are still standing, and it's because they're consuming fuel to dry out the structure. As we get tighter and tighter, it's really important the layers that they're in the right order. As we're using less energy, as less energy is going through that wall, there's less drying ability for it. So it's really important that we understand how and why that water's there in the first place. And this isn't, not fear mongering, not the boogeyman that's out there, but we as builders are seeing houses that weren't built. The builder attempted a high performance or a higher level insulation strategy, but they didn't get the details right. It was in failure on day one, but the symptoms don't show up for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road. It is happening. I just heard of one in Addison County, a house that's 5 years old. that is literally rotting from the inside out. I don't think the builder meant to do it. Certainly the client didn't mean to hire the builder to do it. It's just they didn't get the details right. So us builders.
Jason, can I just take a step back?
Sure.
These codes are, I know electrical codes are national, but adopted by Vermont. Plumbing codes are national and they're adopted by Vermont. Are building codes treated the same way? Are they issued by a national?
So all codes are based off of a national code. And then each of these individual state agencies will review those model codes and they'll tweak them to their own market. So they'll hold hearings, they kind of they might adopt at full face value, or they might go back and they say, look, that provision of the code doesn't make a lot of sense. We do it differently, based on our local, how our locals do it, and they'll amend it. And the energy code, the Vermont Energy Code works the same way. So it's, the legislation of the energy code says that every time the IECC, which is the national code, has an amendment, that the DPS will review that amendment and amend the Vermont Energy Code. So there's kind of this, it's a little bit of like a blind, just it's kind of like, truck drivers following their GPS and getting stuck in the notch, right? It's the state is, they're doing a good job reviewing the code. But as that code ratchets up, so do the requirements in Vermont. And this code cycle has been the one I've been involved in them for 20 years. This code cycle is the one where I think the builders and the affordable housing groups and the AIA group is saying, wait a minute, we really have to address the code compliance aspect of this, so that we're not recklessly, requiring a code that has no oversight in how it's being administered.
So what you were just describing, and the reason I wanted to go back is because you're describing a situation where a house was built, there were conversations with the homeowner and perhaps an architect or a developer or builder, and assuming that the builder has had a good reputation, at some point something failed, and if the outcome of what this proposed committee, if it proposes a whole enforcement system in order to do it, ostensibly an inspector would have seen this and would have inspected this before he closed up the walls. Is that, as an example?
Yeah. So the way that real, and I'm not picking on Vermont and the current system, right? We're here for a reason, right? We tend to trust each other. We tend to have good people. But the way that a kind of a real code program works is that there's a requirement, right? So this is what we have to do. There's an application. So builder, engineer, architect, or client applies and says, this is how I'm going to meet the requirements. That's reviewed. It's reviewed within the boundaries of the code itself, but the other codes too, the building code, the electrical, and the plumbing code. They say that's good. You build it, you get inspected to make sure that you're building it as you applied to build it. And then when you're done, it's certified that it was built to the standard. That's how energy works everywhere else.
And if it's certified, if this were Massachusetts, for instance, and this happened to a house, would the homeowner have recourse?
That I don't know. I don't know if the homeowner has recourse. I think that what you're doing at that point is you're relying on a system just like we do with every other licensed trade. Is that you have design professionals at the table, and you're relying on their expertise and their certifications that it was built the way it was supposed to be.
Okay, we finished a 4-year battle over just getting contractor registration last year, and it's not going to go into effect, but registration, we had long philosophical conversations with the Secretary of State's office why they supported registration and not licensure. But this is really just adjunct to that. It's not necessarily a continuation. This is an attempt to actually provide the information so that as we're supposed to be building X number of units in the next 10 years, I mean, we're always needing units. I think this is an opportunity to build a system where we know, rather than just me putting a hammer on the side of my Prius and calling myself a carpenter, that there's some kind of accountability that the builders who are building know what they're building. Is that what we're striving for?
That is true in that in the bill in front of you, I think it is a step in the right direction, but it is far from getting there, right? That what all of the other states have done has started from the top and just said, this is what's going to happen. We have an agency, these are the codes, this is the program, these are full inspections for all aspects of it, building, electrical, that. Vermont, I think what we're trying to do with this current bill is we're trying to stay in the lane of energy only and saying, all right, well, can we create an inspection and enforcement regime just within the lane of energy? It's a step in the right direction, but it's not going to get us there, because so much of energy and the building science actually sits over in the building code, not the energy code. It would be very, very difficult to write an energy code that basically has the building code inside it as well.
I just have one question from Representative LaBounty, and then I want to move to Dennis, or give you an opportunity to wrap up and then move to Dennis. But Dennis LaBounty would like to ask a question.
Yes, Jason, if you had the opportunity, what state would you pick their code for us to follow? Or could we just implement that code instead of reinventing the wheel?
Yeah, I mean, the state that is, well, it depends on what the goals are, right? Are the goals to create the most affordable housing, or is the goals to create, the most energy efficient housing stock? I would say that New Hampshire probably creates the most affordable housing, because they're still working off of old energy codes, so their bar isn't quite as high, right? And a lower bar is less expensive. It's just the reality. The state that just is the furthest ahead right now in energy efficiency is Massachusetts. That they have some pretty stringent energy codes for every single house, and they just rolled out a new code effective January 1st, and then I think they ratcheted up there was a little transition period to even ratcheting up even further in June of this year. I'm not sure that we can pick a neighboring state and adopt it. It's been said, I've heard it said so many times, the full code program is a full-blown regulatory system. And I've heard many people say, and I kind of agree, that I don't think Vermonters have an appetite for a full code program like that. It's also expensive, right? I think when we come back to this bill right here, there's an opportunity with some DOE funding to focus specifically on just the energy aspect of it, but to create an absolute full code program would be expensive to both the state to create and administer, and to builders and ultimately the clients that pay the builders' bills, to administer it.
Thank you.
Which is a brutal reality, considering, this last 3 years of supply chain and increase in costs, et cetera, et cetera. I mean,
Our costs are up. Our costs to client are up 40% since the fall of 2019.
Yeah, and so to institute something on top of that. But again, this is not instituting something on top of that. This is to do the study to see what it would take to move in that direction, and to create a program that was unique to Vermont, or that fit Vermont's needs. And so, all right, I want to thank you Go ahead, go ahead. I'm
Well, I was
sorry.
just going to say, correct. That's my understanding of the bill. The bill at discussion right now is that there is an opportunity to study, to create a process specific to Vermont and what might work. And I think, even though I'm kind of, I just said, I don't think we're going to a full code program. I think that any step in the right direction, any step towards actual enforcement of the energy code is a very, very important step.
Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
All right, next up, we have Dennis Borbeau. Did I get you right?
Yes, you did very well. Thank you.
Thank you. You're not driving, right?
No, I'm parked at the job site watching it snow.
Okay. Well, welcome to the committee.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak also. I'm going to kind of, I guess, give you comments from more the builder side of this and what I see. We build probably 6 to 8 single-family custom homes in the Franklin County, Chittenden County area every year. I'm also a board member of the Vermont Home Builders Association, and we've been, like as you've mentioned, we've been working on trying to improve education in the building community and improve the quality of our building stock. And what I really want to touch on is the lack of compliance that Jason touched on among the builders in the state. And there's multiple reasons for the lack of compliance. One of the big reasons is the lack of education. There's a lot of builders that just don't know what the codes are. We don't have any type of system or ability to reach out to the builders to teach them what the codes are. And we're hoping that the contractor registry will give us the ability to now have an option to contact more builders and know who they are and help educate them on what the proper building science is, especially as Jason mentioned, as we're getting into their high performance homes. The building science is crucial. The 2023 energy codes, energy code updates that they are proposing are going to require drastically different building procedures on the field. So all of the framers are going to need to be educated on what the new systems are. The lumber yards are going to need to be educated on what the new systems are so that they have the materials that we need to be able to build these wall assemblies so that we don't build unhealthy houses that are going to be very detrimental to the consumer and to the state as a whole. And unfortunately, as you continue to improve the energy efficiencies of a home, we are now going to be required to put in mechanical ventilation systems, et cetera, to keep the house healthy. All of this needs to be all tied together in order for it to work properly. And the consumers need to maintain these systems after the house is completed. But we don't have any enforcement of the codes. So as the codes have continued to increase, builders have said, well, if I start doing this, I start doing that, I'm going to need to increase my price. Neighboring builder, he's not building his house to the same level that we are, so he can build a less expensive house. I know, I was speaking to my plumber who works for many other contractors other than myself. And I know our building company, we've been following the energy codes, have been very adamant on promoting the energy codes to the consumers and what we do. But my plumber's telling me, well, gee, you're insulating the house like this and you're doing that. And he goes, you need to do that? None of the other builders that I work for do that. And I'm like, yes, this is a requirement of the code. It's written in the code, but they don't know, and that those parts of the code are not being completed. So now, as the codes continue to increase again this year, even my own business, I need to start looking at, okay, I'm going to go to a customer and tell them your house is going to cost $12,000 to $14,000 more to build in 2024 than in 23, because I need to put all of these new products in your house in order to meet the new energy code. But other builders will not be promoting the same product, either out of lack of knowledge or lack of wanting to meet the code. And if there are no inspections, they can sign off. And yes, the builder is taking on all the liability by signing off that the house was built to X code, but nobody ever checks. The only time it becomes an issue is when there's a failure, and when there's a failure, it's too late. A good analogy is if you brought the speed limit down to 25 miles an hour on the interstate, and everybody knew that there was no police officers, there would be nobody driving 25. Well, that's exactly what we're doing. We're continuing to move the limit, but we know that there's nobody checking, so who cares what the limit is? I'm just going to do whatever I want. And that is why I feel that this bill is very important, to start having some verification to, number one, even the playing field for all builders. Number two, to ensure that our building in the state of Vermont are performing properly and are going to be healthy. And as Jason mentioned, it's a crucial part of the whole program that Vermont needs to establish. So that's kind of the points I want to touch, and I'll be glad to answer any other questions that someone may have.
And Dennis, just off the top, you build your houses on site as opposed to Jason, who's building modular units and shipping out. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
And so, I mean, because that's two different, really. I mean, I have to imagine that Jason, you have to be, if you're shipping your houses to Todd, they have to be built Massachusetts compliant.
That's correct. We have to build to the code for where the house is being delivered.
And so your Vermont houses might be built differently, or do you have a standard that?
We have a standard hybrid code just to simplify manufacturing.
Yeah, and then Dennis, for you, I mean, when you talk about having to add costs to because of code issues, I mean, that's different than saying plywood went from $8 a sheet to $100 a sheet. And I mean, that's a whole different conversation, I would imagine. But this is something that, as a custom home builder, I mean, you're sitting down with the folks and saying, you know, they're asking them questions or working with an architect. Is that, I mean, they're going to know this before they sign a contract, obviously, specifically that you do build to code and that this is what it entails.
You would be amazed at how few customers care about the energy efficiencies of the house. I need to explain to them what the code is and what the current system is. But if another builder was working with them, they may never touch on those aspects. So no, it is not a requirement for me to answer those questions for them. And it sometimes never comes up in the conversation at all. When the Energy Star program, et cetera, came out from that Efficiency Vermont had, I was very adamant that I was going to participate and I was really going to promote building 5-star energy homes. And I was amazed at the amount of people in the public that wasn't really their goal. They wanted their pretty house and they wanted it to be affordable. That was more important to them.
And
I think
if I could just piggyback onto that just real quickly, is that I see it every day, and back to what Dennis was talking about the it's not a level playing field for the builders that are following the code. When a client looks through my budget pricing, and I've included a heat recovery ventilation system or an energy recovery ventilation system, but that is the same line item value as a quartz countertop, and the other builder might have the same bottom line, but there's no HRV, which is required, but there is quartz countertops. Most clients are going to that other builder. They're going to say that most clients value that more than they do the efficiency of the build.
Yeah, okay, I've heard that song before. But also the idea of, and I mean that in a kind of a sigh, just of knowing that when you do follow the rules, you do cost more, and it is a competition at times for pricing. And I think that's, again, this bill will address and try. It sounds like making codes mandatory, or enforceable, and in terms, and really starting with enforceable, because they are, if they're all subject to pricing, then, if it's, you get what you pay for. Again, I know that not every house is going to fail, but I understand the dilemma that you're talking about here, and I appreciate, Jason, your understanding that, again, Vermont's a different place, and we're coming from a different, we're just coming from a different place, and sometimes being unique doesn't mean that we're the best. It just means we need to figure out a way to make people, again, building all this new housing that's supposed to be going up in the next 10 years. It should be built to a standard that lasts.
Yes.
Which is what codes are supposed to help provide the roadmap to. I like to believe that at one point in my life I could handle a hammer pretty well, but I certainly can't plumb or do electric perfectly. And without being able to do it perfectly, it causes problems. So, my wife used to rag me for it's dripping better than it used to drip. So thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Jason. I'm going to move along to our next witness. Please feel free to stay, though, of course, for this whole conversation, because we may have questions coming back. John Alden is here as the chair of the Public Policy Committee from the American Institute of Architects Vermont chapter. Please, it's good to see you in 3D. And John, long time no see. I don't know if you remember. I do. Okay, John.
Thank you.
John redesigned renovated, did the designs on the renovation of our public school, our elementary.
That was quite a while ago too.
Was it even
there?
Thatcher Brook Primary School then, or was it elementary school?
No, it was Thatcher Brook Primary School. So I'm John Alden. I am the principal at Scott and Partners Architects. We're commercial architects. We live in the world of codes and compliance. I want to try and bring our discussion maybe back a little bit out of the fine points. I want to give a big thanks to Jason and Dennis, though everything they said pretty much is true. It's a really tough time out there to get this compliance. Architects feel, so I represent the design professionals at the AIA Vermont and other design professionals who are on the certification hook for compliance, right? So we sign the certificate that says this building complies with the energy code. And that's either the commercial building energy code or the residential building energy code. So our license is saying that's been done correctly. So we have to do that for every project, just like the builders are supposed to do that for every project as well. I'm so grateful to all of you for passing the contractor registry bill last year, because, we need to know who these people are that are building, and they need to know what they're supposed to know. And the only way that you can get to them is to know who they are. So we see this bill here, we're very much in support of the bill that we're talking about today, because it continues that effort to create an entire system that is working together to produce buildings that meet our energy code. And without a more robust process in place, we will not get to our energy goals. We have them, 2030 is a big trigger number. The energy code is ratcheting it up every 3 years as it comes out and is refreshed. It's ratcheting us all up towards meeting our own stated goals. And if we don't have a way to make sure that's happening and to help the people that are doing this, and that includes the design professionals and the builders and the administrators and the trainers and everybody else who's involved, you need those people all to be on the same page and all to have some guidance to work with. And the system at the moment is fairly disjointed. So as Jason mentioned, the building codes, the life safety code, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structure, all of that is over here in one camp administered through the Division of Fire Safety. The energy code is in another camp over here with public safety, right? So our public service. So you got two entities both promulgating codes that need to work together. One has people in the field, you can ask them questions, you can review things with them, you can work together, you can and buildings are complex, right? And they're getting more complex. So yeah, there's a lot of things that have to come together, and it's nice to have a whole system in place from the design professionals all the way down through the people that are administering and the people that are building. And so we have that with everything but the energy code. We added accessibility a few years ago. That went pretty well. Energy code, right? So we in the industry feel this missing piece, and we've been after it for a number of years. We meet regularly with the Division of Fire Safety, the AIA Vermont, just to talk, how are things going? How can we work better together? How do we achieve better buildings, better compliance? What training opportunities are there? And I'm going to let Sandy talk a little bit about this because she does quite a bit of that. The energy code has a different model, and so it gets written. Yes, there is a model energy code out there that's produced by the same people that do all the other codes. Vermont takes that, rewrites the whole thing, and issues their own book through the same code council. So that's a little different than all the other codes where what they issue in the, I don't know if you know, the Vermont Fire and Building Code is actually a little thin manual that tells you what parts of the other codes apply, right? So they've adopted these other codes, and our building code says use these chapters, don't use these chapters, and if there's issues, here's how you work them out. The energy code got rewritten. Like, there is one out there. We could do the same thing with that, but we don't. We issue our own, and so we've have our own opinion on what that process might look like. I mean, it could be as easy as taking the model code that's out there and doing the same. Use this, tweak this in Vermont, right? So,
Can I? Take a step sideways and can you explain to us energy codes? Like you said that there's overlap.
Yeah.
All right, and I can.
Jason touched on this. So
yeah, I just
putting
want
a wall together. We're really talking as much about the thermal envelope. When the average person thinks about building efficiency, they want to know, how it's related to the furnace and the size of the furnace or what type of heat you have or what, but you're really talking about heat loss. So all the money that you've appropriated already for all this weatherization and all these other programs that help people tighten up their homes, you're supposed to build them that way to begin with, right? Well, 100 years ago, you didn't. So those can be weatherized, but the ones that you're building right now today, half of the AIA Vermont says we should be building to the 2030 standards now. Why wait, right? Because every building you build today in 2030, you're gonna have to go back and retrofit. And so there's a real tension there about how do you get there? How can you get the level ratcheted up so that you're really doing a good job being efficient with energy? Because that's, we spend a lot of our total energy on buildings. Sometimes it's a very large piece of the pie, transportation, housing, buildings. So.
And these standards, I mean, I know that the CBs, those are for the commercial, when we talk about multi-unit buildings, we're talking about still the same thing. We're talking about the energy codes then are, envelope, the other phrase that
covers a lot. Yeah.
Right. The other phrase we use which is not common, I think, to someone like me who will put a hammer on the side of my Prius and say I'm a carpenter, is the concept of building science.
Right.
Where this has been studied, this has been worked on, this is what weatherization of old houses is about, is to create comfort. But you're talking about these are building codes for new construction primarily, for both residential and commercial, and for our purposes, residential and multi-unit housing. And
so it covers the energy code will cover the envelope, and the performance criteria now are much more than just insulation. Like, turns out that the insulation is great, but if it's fiberglass bats, air can go through them, right? Turns out that the air movement is way more important than the insulation. So you have to stop the air movement before you can have any real insulation value, right? Like you're wearing, a fleece jacket or a wool sweater or something, and it's windy, right? Nothing happens. So you're cold, right? Just that's how that happens. You need something to block the wind. So the house or any envelope needs a number of layers. You have to manage the water. You have to manage the vapor. You have to manage the heat flow or stopping the heat or the conductive heat, the radiant heat. There's, many things that go in there besides just, we have, so for example, a 2x4 wall or a 2x6 wall that's supposedly R19, because that's what you buy at the store. It says R19 on it. By the time you get done with all the framing that got put into that house, that wood stud wall is like an R11, and a metal stud wall, which is typical in commercial, is an R6, right? So the mechanical engineers have been listening to us say, oh no, we got this nice R19 wall. And they say, no, you don't. We know you're lying to us. You've got an R6 wall. So they make a bigger furnace, right? Or boiler or whatever. The heating system has to be more robust because they know we've been lying to them. So now the energy code is trying to pull us all back together and say, okay, your energy values have to be real. You can't give us some number that's printed on the side of your insulation, and it can't be the brand new value of the insulation. It has to be the value of the insulation 10 years from now after it's aged for a while. So the energy code is going to go through all of this stuff, including the shell, including the heating system, including the ventilation system, including fresh air, heat recovery, because I've got to bring in fresh air for things. Well, when that air comes in, something's got to go out. When that air goes out, there goes all my heat, heat up the chimney, all that kind of thing. So you got to reclaim the heat before you throw the air out, right? So that's the energy recovery system that we were talking about earlier. But all of those things are in the energy code. And if you get them all to coordinate, you got a good building that's energy efficient and comfortable and healthy. And we want that. But it isn't going to happen without this administrative piece, we're trying not to use the word enforcement, although there is that enforcement piece out there. It's the whole rest of the administrative piece that would be critical to making this whole system work better, right? Who do you talk to when you have a question? where did I go to get training? How do I know training's available? You know, who's doing it? Is it a coordinated effort or is it not part of the other building codes yet, right? So we're urging the state to bring them all together to say, this is important to us. We said so in our energy plan, and here's how we're gonna get there, right? You gotta have the whole vision to get there, because it isn't gonna happen without it.
I want to appreciate that notion that as an AIA architect, you're licensed, but I can design a building without a license. I can buy a plan and say, here you go, and
To a point.
to a point,
Yeah.
right? But then I have to hire licensed people to put, except for builders who are not licensed. It's just interesting because when you say education, yes, there's always ongoing professional education and when you're a licensed person in order to continue to qualify for a license. But if you're not required to be licensed, it's a different story.
Yeah, so housing, I won't say a lot about housing because the housing market is, you can build a house, design a house, whatever, and you don't necessarily fall under the purview of a license. Commercial buildings, you're gonna need a license at some point, and I think the current way it works is that if it's under $200,000, the state has a way for you to go through the building permit process without drawings and without, an architect or a stamp. And we're not happy about that. We've been arguing with them that that's not a thing. You shouldn't be able to do that. It's one of the things we talk about when we get together. And so there's a lot wrapped up in this. You're hearing a lot because all of us in the profession of building have been working on these things for years, right? So I'm really happy that you're doing this. We totally encourage it. We also, I just wanted to mention that there is a relationship between this bill and the grant application that's been put in, and I think you're going to hear from Richard shortly. But it would be really great for this bill to be passed because it would show support for our overall state's efforts. And so that would help the grant application, which brings us money instead of spender.
Right, and that's, we need to wordsmith something that addresses the fact that this may be funded, and anyway, we'll talk to Richard about
We
it.
also don't think it should be meshed in with other bills. This is important enough to stand on its own. Like, don't add it to something.
Yeah, I can't promise that.
I just
That's
Sandy, do you want to add anything, by the way?
Yeah, if you have I have a couple minutes before we get to Richard. Yeah, that would be fine.
I'm on the policy committee with John, and I've been working with Richard. I've been involved with this issue for the whole 20 years as well. I guess, in terms of the bill, I just heard that it did get merged into S100 today, this bill. So the reason why the architects are going to continue urging that this continue with the life of its own, is we think it is so important that it needs to go forward whether or not S100 has a whole lot of housing, other initiatives in it. If it has to go into next year, we hope that this continues. To explain briefly, I don't think it was covered, that H332 and the DOE grant are for both commercial and for residential building codes. So this is it, trying to solve the administration problem for all buildings in Vermont, and all buildings that are new and all buildings that would go under renovation. So the problems we've been discussing are a little bit different from commercial because there is this whole family of building codes already for commercial construction. But weirdly, fire safety has no jurisdiction over the energy code part of it. So if there's a conflict in the codes, that's a really big problem. And there's an example about, I think 5 or 6 years ago, of a high-rise building in Burlington that actually had to have the elevator torn out after it had just been built in because of a conflict that could not be resolved. There's no one to talk about a resolution with on the energy side of it, because fire safety does not have jurisdiction over that. It's a very bizarre situation. This affects multiple family housing where fire safety has jurisdiction. So if a single family home rents out a house, even one night a year, fire safety has jurisdiction over it, but not over the energy code. And if it's multifamily, fire safety has jurisdiction over it, but not over the energy issues. So
we just have been dealing with the rental registry, and we talked about enforcement of health and safety codes
Yes.
that used to be in the Department of Health.
yes,
Have moved over to the Department of Fire Safety or are in transition now because of a very similar, we, the Department of Fire Safety can tell you whether you've been wired properly, but not whether or not the black mold that's sitting over there is, it's a different kind of safety.
that's explicitly, exactly, right. And it's so weird that if you look at the IRC, the International Residential Building Code, which is what we use for multifamily housing, the International Energy Code, the IECC, is actually in there. It's integrated as a chapter. But because there's no integration of the administration or authority, we have a standalone document called the Commercial Building Energy Standards, or residential. And Vermont has changed it so much that conflicts do happen. So it's really a mess. It's hard for builders. It's hard for architects. It's hard for ultimately very difficult for the owners when for instance, an elevator has to be torn out. So it's really messy. It's bizarre to have regulations that have no administration, no path for solving conflicts, no path for appeals, no path for project review. It's truly bizarre to have this situation.
And so again, this study committee would be working with, again, the list of people that are in here.
Yeah.
To develop an outline of what and of how this would be, again, I appreciate enforced, but you're looking to create a structure that can work either with Department of Fire Safety or to strengthen Department of Fire Safety, whatever it is at the committee. But I appreciate all this background context. I just want to be clear that what we're talking about is we're going to start this process again. It's not even starting it again. It's starting to create that structure that has oversight.
It's because the legislature never touched this issue before. It kind of shied away from it.
Sure.
They said, okay, you can make this. So if you look at South Burlington now, or even some of the smaller towns that are trying to enforce this at a municipal level, they have no teeth. If an owner or a builder says, I don't feel like doing it, they have to walk away. There's no, and the architects have actually been advocating for fire safety to take over these responsibilities. They have shown that they can be trained very well, very quickly. For instance, they now oversee accessibility in the state. And I don't want to get too far into our advocacy on that, but it is bizarre that there's this open area that is such a critical part of the rest of construction. And I want to say with this DOE grant, it's $4 million that a chunk of it would let us figure out the Vermont way forward, how to do this so that it would be great for South Burlington, so that it would be great for Worcester or Middlesex, and really get resources where it's needed. In an ideal system, we won't need enforcement because everyone would be complying. But what will happen after the study committee makes its recommendations is it has to go through the legislative process.
Right.
So the reason why we really need this bill to go forward is to make that next step possible. And then if we may not get the grant. We've already gotten encouragement to go to the next step, but if it doesn't work, then we're stuck. We're back down at step one. So this bill has kind of allows for it to go forward if the DOE grant doesn't proceed. Did Richard get there? He is. Okay.
So I want to get to Richard.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. So Richard Fazy, welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, and we're actually gonna, I don't know if you were on at the very beginning, but we're gonna you going around the circle just because we're running out of time, and I want to know about the status of the DOE grant, but please, the microphone is yours, and just if you could just fill us in on what you think we need to know about the status of the grant, the status of this bill, and where it's going to point us.
Great. Well, thank you. I did provide a short PowerPoint presentation with a handful of slides. I can share my screen, although I'm not allowed to do that, or I think that Ron has it there. Would that?
Ron is making you a co-host right now.
And it is on our committee page.
And it is on our committee page. So you are now a co-host.
Okay, there we go. So, can you see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Great, okay. So thank you for inviting me today. Let's see, let me just make this go forward. So just as an introduction, I'm Richard Fazy. I live in Starksboro. I have a business called Energy Futures Group, a clean energy consulting firm. I'm one of 4 partners. We've got 13 employees based in Heinsberg. So we do work all over the country. Have a net zero renovated building in Heinsberg. And so, but I'll get to the gist of what I want to talk about today. Unfortunately, I was not able to join you until 11:30. I have a monthly prior commitment in Connecticut. Luckily, I didn't have to drive down there this time, but so I didn't. I'm sorry if I'm going to repeat anything that we talked about earlier. I'll try to go through this relatively quickly, and maybe this was already shared. I just wanted to at least explain quickly why we're talking about this. So here's a little graph. The orange line is our Vermont's version of the residential building energy standards, RBs, over time. The values are energy use intensity, which is energy use per square foot. And as projected, as should happen, codes go up over time. So we put in place RBs in 1997, and with each iteration of the code in 2005, 2011, 2015, 2020, the code has improved the performance of the buildings each time. Unfortunately, the blue line shows that when the Department of Public Service goes back and does field studies to see how we're doing, building to those codes, we can see that compliance rates go from a high in 2005 of 74% compliance to 66%, and then down to 54% is the last study that just came out of the code that was in place 2 years ago. So you can presume that as our codes have increased in stringency, and we're about to roll out the 2023 code going through the LCAR process, as codes go up, this line is just going to continue to go down. So this is why we're talking about this. We've got one of the best codes in the country, but we've got some of the worst compliance rates. So we are pursuing this opportunity that others have talked about, this Department of Energy funding opportunity announcement, or FOA as they talk about, that was put out a couple months ago for specifically on building code. So they're putting out $225 million over 5 years and they're going to award 10 to 30 awardees. As Sandy mentioned, we put in an initial concept paper, and the Department of Energy liked our idea and encouraged us to put in a full award. So what we're there, you can put forward a grant proposal for 3 to 5 years. We are focusing on a 3-year project. So they're looking for specifically areas of interest, local and state code adoption. I think we're doing pretty well in that department already. But workforce development, I'll talk about that. So workforce development, implementation and compliance, we're certainly right into that in that area. Innovative approaches, we've got some good thinking going on there. Want to make sure there's an equity, energy, and environmental justice component to it, and partnership. So I think we really do check all the boxes, and DOE's review of our proposal indicated that. They're looking for developing the next generation workforce. We're talking about bringing in market-based energy professionals, home energy or HERS raters or home energy system raters, of which Efficiency Vermont has started developing a network of those in the state. So can we bring those into the code support, code administration area, facilitating code energy updates, improving code compliance, advancing new and innovative policies and tools, increasing equity in code-related policies and planning. So these are what DOE is looking for. And we really have a lot of opportunity to align our proposal with their goals. So we're working on a pretty tight time frame here. The grant application, or the FOA, was put out earlier this year. It's due March 27th. We're working on this full application right now. We'll hear later next month, and probably going through our experience working with the Department of Energy is it takes months, and so they're probably not too unrealistic that it wouldn't be till fall, if we were selected, that we would see anything starting. So I just want to sort of finish up with who we've been working with, and the sort of 7 areas that we're focusing on. So we've got a great team of support and partners here. So the actual project team members, that would be grant recipients, we're leading that effort. We've got the Secretary of State's Office of Professional Regulation working with us. We need to have at least one state agency on board. The International Code Council that develops these codes nationally is part of our team. Efficiency Vermont, Burlington Electric, Vermont Gas, and all the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies, the Regional Planning Commissions Trade Association. So they're all part of the active team, but we've got a whole lot of project sponsors as well too. AIA, builders, and a number of other supporters. So there's clearly a lot of interest in this. And I think that's the final slide I have. So we are, given what DOE is looking for, we are putting forward a proposal that develops this, gives us an opportunity to put in place a summer study, just as H332 outlines. Sit down at the table and work up a way that we can figure out how we're going to implement and administer a code compliance effort in Vermont. So a code administration plan and implementing that, developing the professional energy professionals workforce to help support that in the field. There's some compliance tools, innovative compliance tools using phone apps and some other things that are pretty creative that are out there to help cut costs and keep track of data. A lot of training and support. Efficiency Vermont and the other utilities are really looking to this to help get the word out there. Working with the International Code Council to put in place a builder training certification process so that the builder registry can recognize who's been trained, who knows about the code, and who doesn't. We'd have a project advisory committee made up of local and national experts that we turn to. And at the same time, too, Sandy mentioned that this is about renovation as well, too. Burlington has an existing ordinance, and there's some other communities, too, that have some potential for growing. Most of the focus here is on new construction, but we do want to have a component of this for existing buildings as well, too, and understand what's worked in Burlington, and then managing this project. So we're looking at a little less than $5 million in the grant request. So the budget is being finalized right now, but at least $4 million in federal funds coming to Vermont to help us set this up and put in place the training, the outreach, the components that would ensure that we've got a system in place that levels the playing field for everybody and get us back on track for ensuring that everybody's building to code.
Thank you, Richard. Is the grant through Energy Futures Group?
We are the lead entity, yes. So it would be through us in partnership with the rest of the folks on the list.
And the cost of this, as listed in the bill, the cost for the summer study group, would that be covered by this grant?
If we got the grant, it would be, yes.
Okay, because if we move forward with this, we just need to make sure that we contemplate that this is, as far as our budgeting process is concerned, this is almost $125,000 ask, with an asterisk next to it, that if this grant comes through, then that money wouldn't go into this purpose, that it would get repurposed someplace else.
Exactly. I don't know how you manage that, but that is the intent here. There's certainly, this would enable what's being proposed in H332 to take place and be fully funded. Yes, so.
No, we just need to have that information for our discussion purposes and to see what the proper way of, again, if we're able to move forward on this, what the proper way of getting that language is. I haven't seen what the Senate put into their bill yet, but we'll take a crack at it and see what we can do in order to just sort of make it dance, I guess is the way. So, Sandy?
May I ask an important, I think it's kind of, Richard, your committee group, which could include legislators if they wanted to participate, it would just end up with a recommendation that would be going to a legislative committee, right?
Yes. So
you can't take it any further. So
that's
there
great.
would have to be some discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's no guarantee that we're going to get this grant. There never is. So I know it's very competitive. I think we've got a good chance, but so I think that the study that is proposed in H332 really, in my mind, serves two purposes. One is if we don't get the grant, it's a great backstop. And the process still needs to happen regardless of whether it's funding through the grant or not. But if we do get the grant, we're still going to have to come back to the legislature with the proposal that comes out of the study process. And there's going to need to be a formalized process to sort of codify the recommendations that come out of the study. So in either case, it seems like there is an important role for the study group and the recommendations that come out of H332.
Okay, any further questions for Richard? And just being aware that it is 12 o'clock and we've been working since 9. Thank you so much for clarifying that, Richard. I know it seemed a little bit of a 1.5 on the YouTube speed, but I appreciate you and appreciate the slides that you shared with us. John and Sandy, thank you. And Dennis, if you're still there, Jason, if you're still there, thank you so much for your time this morning. And